In the second year, which started this past July 1st, within 2 months, we were back in deficit. 20 million, 40 million, 60 million. Within a week after Election Day, the state of Connecticut was in deficit $365 million for this fiscal year, and we had only 8 months to fix it. Constitution says when the deficit is that high, the governor must put forth a deficit mitigation plan. He did so, and he asked for help. The legislature has to adopt that plan. Many of us on the Republican side of the aisle who had disagreed with the governor's path, who had put forth a balanced budget without raising tax increases, that shrunk the size of government, was fully balanced and vetted by the nonpartisan Office of Fiscal Analysis. Even though many of us, certainly those here, had said, "We told you so," we felt we had to help. Why? If your house is on fire, you don't ask who set the fire, you help put it out. We took a constitutional oath to do that, and that's what we did. In December, unprecedented. We sat down as Republicans and Democrats and dealt with that budget deficit. We actually came to agreement on December 14th, 2012, the day of the Sandy Hook tragedy. I called it the spirit of Sandy Hook brought us together, and we closed that deficit for that time. Unfortunately, within 1 week, we were another $100 million back in deficit and are now heading to go into $200 million. That is the state that we found ourselves in. This January, after the new legislature was put in, this is the fiscal situation we found ourselves in. In spite of all I just described, including the tax increases, the governor presented a budget by saying the following, that first and foremost, we are facing a deficit of $1.2 billion for next year and $1.3 billion for the year after. We have an unemployment rate at 8.6%, higher than the national average, and the highest unemployment rate in New England. We also find ourselves at this time rated the 50th worst financial state in the United States of America. We have the highest per capita debt. We have the least job growth of any state in the United States of America. We have been rated the least business-friendly state and the worst place to do business in the United States of America. We have been rated the worst state in the United States of America to retire in. These are not, I'll read that to you. Sure.
State Business Climate is the Tax Foundation. Forbes magazine did one on retirement.
Milken Institute, Public Fund Survey, and Tax Foundation.
American Petroleum Institute for the gas tax.
And Department of Labor.
We also, Moody's, Forbes magazine, not Forbes, Moody's, Standard & Poor's, Moody's downgraded the bond rating of the state of Connecticut a year ago, January, for the first time in our history. And they claimed when they did so that we bonded too much money, we borrowed for operating expenses. The cash pool, which is a common cash pool, that's the amount of money of cash on hand that the state pays its operating expenses with, salaries, light bills, etc., is currently at $24 million, the lowest level in the history of the state. It is enough money to run the state for 8 hours. 8 hours. That is the state we find ourselves in. With that backdrop, on February 9th, the governor, as is his constitutional duty, presented a budget to the General Assembly for us to deliberate and pass. We are in the process of deliberating that budget now, and with the help of my colleagues, and I'll turn it over to give my voice a rest to Senator France, we would like to present to you what the governor has presented as how we will balance the budget. Scott, if you would.
Excellent. We'll start square one, just to give you an idea of where the money comes from and where the money goes. Representative Cafero did a great job outlining how the whole structure of government works up in Hartford. What you might not know on top of that is where the money comes from and how the split looks on a pie chart like this. The income tax, which we didn't have prior to 20 years ago approximately, is now roughly 40% of the income, the revenues to the state of Connecticut. Close behind that is the sales tax at roughly 20% of revenues to the state of Connecticut. And just behind that are federal grants to the state of Connecticut, which is 17%. The business taxes are roughly 7%. And then you have a whole slew of smaller taxes that go to contribute to 100% of the revenues to the state of Connecticut. And if you want to see where your money goes here, and by the way, all of you are taxpayers. Thank you for being taxpayers in the state of Connecticut. If we didn't have tax revenues, we wouldn't have a state government, and there's no way that the people who really desperately need help would have the resources to be able to get the services and goods that they need. So it's roughly an equal split between the bigger categories, as you can see here, and I'm sorry this is not working. But interestingly, education is the biggest one at just shy of 25% of the overall budget. Behind that would be social services, 22%. Hospitals, 9%, nursing homes, 7%. What I usually do is I lump those three different categories together, and that's roughly 38% of the state budget. So health-related services is well over a third of the budget. It's a very generous state when it comes to taking care of people in the area of health care. Corrections is roughly 11%. A scary figure is our debt service, which currently is 11%, but we've taken on a whole lot of new debt, and there's a lot more debt to be added to our balance sheet at the state level with interest rates at historic lows. We all know they're going to go back up. There's no other place for interest rates to go. It's just a question of when. That number could skyrocket to 13 and 14% if interest rates go up. Even if the Federal Reserve doesn't want them to, inflation can drive interest rates. Moody's gives you a guideline of about 10% maximum for debt service. So, the budget. The budget that the government...
How much of the numbers you gave are labor costs? How much are state employees, salary, pension, and so on? It's got to be 80%.
It's probably not quite that because a lot is contracted out, but it's probably 70–75% would be my guess. They don't give the breakdown on that basis, and that's a great question. And I can certainly find out the answer to that within a few days if you're interested. If you have a card, if you leave that with me afterwards.
Just though, to answer your question, this has nothing to do with current employees, but with regard to pension and health care for the state, just the pension and health care, the benefits, not the salaries, of state employees and retirees, it amounts to 11% of the budget. That's just pension and health care, that does not include the salaries.
I know, but if you look at, let's say it's 70% for labor, and so you have taxes coming in and you have, essentially you have labor costs. And labor you froze for 5 years, so you're between a rock and a hard place.
Good point.
Yeah, it is a good point. And to, before getting into some of the more detailed aspects of the budget, and I'm sorry this is really small, I can walk this down the aisle here. You'll see the bottom line here is our population growth, okay? It's pretty much flat as a pancake. And you have the inflation rate here, which is the next line up. And then you have the cost of government since 1987, so roughly 20-some-odd years, 25 years, call it. And you can see there's mathematically a disconnect going on here.
Is that what they call unsustainable?
I would certainly call it unsustainable.
That's a big word in Washington, so I'm wondering.
Absolutely, absolutely. And there are all sorts of implications that go along with that. And if you were to look at the CPI graph, it would be somewhere just above the inflation line here, but well below the rate of growth in government expenditures. So there is a disconnect here, and it is eventually going to be unsustainable. This is our tax base here. It's exhausting. And they're getting to the point where they either can't afford it or they're just not willing to pay it, and a lot of people, unfortunately, are moving. And, yes?
What has been the growth rate of our state employees during this time?
Interestingly, it's not so much the rate of growth of the number of state employees. If you compare us to 30 and 40 years ago, we're probably a little bit more, but not as much as you would expect. If you compare us to 10 years ago, we're less. However, the other side of that equation is what's happened to their compensation, what's happened to their benefits, their health care, and that's gone through the roof. And you know, if this chart looks scary here, the forecasts start to go up at a much higher angle. They start to compound it at a much greater rate. And we all know that that's a dangerous mathematical situation.
To give you an idea about compensation, you remember I said that there's about full, part-time, all in, 90+ thousand state employees. The average salary is $74,000. And, excuse me, yes, 33% of state employees of that 90,000 make in excess of $100,000. That's how quickly the compensation has risen.
Does that include overtime?
In some cases, it does.
That's not a 40-hour week, I presume.
In some cases, it's actually a 35-hour week.
That doesn't include benefits.
That does not include benefits, that's salary.
And those of you in the private sector know in your businesses that the rate that you use typically is between 25 and maybe 35%. And I know a lot of companies that are a lot less than that in terms of the percentage of the salary that goes into benefits. Take a guess what it is at the state level. 63%. 63%. It is. Did you have a quick question? Because we'll try to plow through this and then we'll get to your questions.
We've not had any job growth in 25 years.
At least.
Would there be a correlation between that lack of job growth and that line going up on cost of government?
In my estimation, yes. Yes, if you have a very competitive business environment, you attract great, terrific employers. You look at one of 5 great states in the country today, who through the last 4 years of the Great Recession, the greatest that we'll ever see in our lifetimes, have actually been job producers. And they've done that because their tax rate, their tax environment is very friendly, the regulatory environment is very friendly. That's where the employers want to be. If we had that kind of an environment up here, we had a solution to our transportation problems, we'd have much more employers up here. You know, when you hear the chairman of UTC, United Technologies Corporation, Pratt & Whitney and Otis Elevators, et cetera, Sikorsky, say, we're out of here. And when they are asked, where are you going to go, they say, anywhere but Connecticut. You know you have a situation on your hands.
I would submit that the governor's top 5 program, basically the incentives to bring companies into the state, by definition, that admits that otherwise they wouldn't come, but for the tax incentives. So by definition, we're an unfriendly state, because the governor has proven that in order to get these companies to come in, we're bribing them. And then if you look at the other businesses that have been here and aren't getting that kind of benefit, they're understandably upset with how, you know, they're not being treated equally. And in a difficult time. Correct.
Why don't we give it back to you?
Well,
Your voice is not better.
Well, it is, but let me explain another thing. You know, obviously all of us, we meet with business people, large and small. By the way, another factoid, 73% of the businesses in the state of Connecticut have 9 or less employees. 53% have 4 or less employees. We are a state of small businesses. Now, God bless the large businesses. Please come and create jobs in our wonderful state. But we are a state of small businesses. When I'm talking to those larger businesses and say, what's the deal? How come there's no job growth? To a person, they've said the following. They say business people look to expand or grow or start or move to a state that has stability, predictability. We don't mind paying a tax, fair tax. What we don't want is the rules of the game to be changed in the middle of the game. Because then, as a business person, we cannot predict. One guy told me that when they decide to expand a business, they go to some big corporate boardroom and they put up on the screen maybe 4 states that are in contention. Connecticut is typically one of them because typically the CEOs live in Connecticut. And on that board, they've had their staff analyze various factors. What's the political climate, small p, not capital? What kind of bills are they, what's their regulatory environment? What's their tax structure? What's their stability? What are some of the bills that maybe not have become law but have been introduced? To a person, these gentlemen and ladies told me that the first state to come off the board is Connecticut. And as an example, in order to I mentioned that in order to balance the budget 2 years ago, the governor raised corporate tax, every tax there was. But what he said was, and what these businesses counted on, is I'm only going to do it for 2 years. By that time, our economy will be okay, and I will take this surcharge away. He had the same kind of deal, if you will, in the area of an energy tax that he put on. We're just going to get over this hump, said he at the time, and then I'm going to take it away. Well, in this budget, he extended it for yet another 2 years, both the energy tax and the corporate tax. And that plays right into what those ladies and gentlemen of business told me. There's no predictability here. We do not want to come to a state where we are told if you buy certain tax credits, they'll be honored at X rate, and after we buy them, we say, sorry, we're going to cut that rate in half. We don't want to come to a state that says this surcharge will only last for 2 years, and then it gets extended for 2 more, and 2 more after that. That is the lack of stability and predictability that business people count on and will run from when it doesn't exist. And I would submit to you that that's the reason we don't have the kind of job growth that frankly every other state in the union is having.
Well,